The first challenge is a web spidering application. And a web spidering application is very frequently used online. It is also sometimes referred to as a bot. It is an autonomous application that can scan through websites. If you give it a starting address, it'll scan through the web page and it will look for links. It will look for other information that you tell it to look for. When we talked about the email extraction assignment, we talked about how people use bots with this email extraction algorithm to harvest email addresses for use in spam. A web spidering application can be used for that sort of thing and also a lot of other things. I mean, Google still uses web spidering extensively to enhance their search product. That is their primary thing that they do. So web spidering is very common. But basically, you're going to be building an application or a program that can start with a web page and scan through that web page, grab any links that it sees in that web page, and then follow those links and do the same thing until it has completely understood or traveled the entire website. Now, for the purpose of this assignment, I am going to give you a website that I built specifically for this assignment that contains very, very simple code. The HTML code that you'll be unpacking is rather simple and straightforward. So this is really, truly a practice assignment. So to set up the assignment and talk about how the library or the modules work in Python that allow you to do this work, I'm going to first very briefly cover how a web server works with a normal type of scenario when you're surfing the web. So if you're sitting at your computer and you decide you want to go to a web page, you type an address in your web browser, or maybe you click a link. That creates what's called a request, okay, an HTTP request or a hypertext transport protocol. It's basically a series of handshakes that a computer does with a server. And that request, how does it know which server to talk to? Well, that's the first part of your web address. The www.something.com actually tells your computer which server to talk to. The rest of the web address after that is part of the request to the server. It's requesting a file, it's requesting an exchange of data, it's sending messages to the server. So that first part through the .com is how we know which server to talk to. Everything else after that is talking to the server about which thing it wants. Usually in a very basic scenario, it says, hey, do you have this web page at this address on your server? So it sends a request. The server does whatever it needs to. Okay, most of the scenarios we deal with nowadays, it's doing some kind of database work or running some kind of a script on the server. In a simple scenario like what we're going to be dealing with today, it's simply saying, do I have that web page? And if it does, it'll send back an HTML file, which is a file that is encoded with special code. And then when it arrives back at your browser uses that code to display the web page as it was intended to be displayed. And so what we're going to be doing in this web spidering application is pretending to be a web browser, where I'm actually going to give you code in Python that will allow you to create a fake web browser. Because if you don't do that, and you send a request to the server's going to say, you're trying to hack me, and there's no way I'm giving you anything. So we will set up a fake web browser and send a request to the server for an HTML file, and then we'll take that and we'll process it, pull the links out, and follow the links. So when I give you the address of the web page that I created for this, it's going to look something like this. It's actually going to be even more simple than this, but it's on my web server that I have, and it's just a static web page. So this is what you'll see in your web browser if you go to that web page. If you view the source code. I don't know if you've ever played around with this, but if you right click on the web page and you choose view source, you can see the HTML code. And it looks like this. This is the actual HTML code for that page. And you can see here, each of the links is easily available, easily readable. And you know how to recognize a link when you see it. But you have to teach Python. In the same way you taught it to recognize an email address, you have to teach it how to recognize a link. So you'll be able to pull those links out. And the links that are not on bmosley.com, you don't want to follow, because if you, for example, follow the link to google.com and start following links there, you'll try to spider the whole internet, and eventually your computer will run out of space and crash. We're only going to follow links that are on that website. So only the ones that start with bmosley.com. These other ones we're not going to follow. But you will keep track of those. So you want to keep track of those and only follow the ones that are on the website. So what we'll end up with is sort of following something very similar to this. And this is about the size of the website that I'm giving you to play around with, to test here. I think it's about 4 or 5 pages. But from the home page, you'll have a couple of links. And from one of those pages, you'll have a couple more links that are all inside the website. And I'm also going to throw some other links that are outside the website for you, because you need to learn how to spider only a website within a given constraint. So what you'll produce in the end is something like this. This is commonly referred to as a sitemap. It doesn't look like a map, but it basically has a list of pages and what pages link from what pages. You can see it's indenting as we get deeper into the site. So these final lower level pages are indented 2 spaces. Page 1 and page 2 here are indented 1 space, and so on. So that's something like what you'll produce there. So that is challenge 1. And what you'll see here, if you go to the website under resources, it says download the sample code for using the URL library module. And that is this here. It's not a lot of code. So I'm just going to copy and paste that into my web browser, or not my web browser, but my PyCharm here. And I'm going to put these carriage returns in here so I can divide this code up into the sections so we can talk about it. Okay, so at the top, we're importing one function from URL library called request. And then we're also importing a module called SSL. SSL stands for Secure Socket Layer. That is how we get to websites that start with HTTPS, which is kind of the basic standard for security now. If you don't use SSL, the server will not do any business with your fake web browser. So this is part of setting up the fake browser. These first 3 lines where I'm setting up an object called CTX is in fact creating a context for SSL. Basically, it's a wrapper for my fake web browser that says everything this web browser does is going to be secure. So I'm creating a fake certificate and a secure socket layers context. You can see down here on line 9, I'm actually using that context later on. So I'm creating that first. That's what that is. The second part is actually putting together the web address or the web request. You can see here's the URL that I'm going to start with. This is the main page of the site. If I click on this, it will actually, or if I copy and paste that into my web browser, it will actually take me. So these pages are very, very simple. A lot of times they have only one link. This one has that. And then we have a couple of links here. This one says GameStop, Apple, and then another test page, which has a couple more links that are off-site to it. It's very, very basic, okay? And when I look at the source on this, you can see it's very simple. That's the whole page, okay? So all you have to do is find that web address and pull it out and then decide whether to follow it or not. Okay. So back to my URL library here. I'm going to change that to the other test page so it doesn't get a whole bunch of garbage. What this does is this sets up a string that is the URL of the web address of the starting point for that site. In this instance, I'm using this code one time and I'm just grabbing the page. Okay, this is starter code for you. You'll need to put that into some kind of a function where you give it a web address and it returns the page or something like that. But what I'm doing here is I'm using this web address. I'm creating the web browser here and here. Okay, so this is, and if you look, actually right here, this line here is actually telling it that it's going to pretend to be Chrome, and this is the exact version of Chrome that it's pretending to be. So I'm pretending to be the Chrome web browser. Here I am opening the URL using the secure sockets layer, the secure layer that I created, the context. And so when I open the URL, then I have to read the page. That's what I'm doing on this line. And when I read the page, it's just like reading a text file, like we talked about last time. So when I hit read, the entire page, all that HTML code goes straight into this string, and then I'm just printing it out here. So when I run this, the result is actually a copy of the HTML code from that page.